and myself, also supported by another consultant helping us in interpretation. And also we were guided and supported by the UNDP project management unit headed by Sugandhi, with the support of two assistants, Tevni and Anuka. So here, this 1 hour period, we will have very short presentation, 4 presentations, starting with Dr. Manoj presenting, the process we have gone through, and also some of the themes, they emerge, and also the key recommendation made, followed by 3 dialogue, leadership dialogue, then the responses. Again, we had a couple of consultations, the physical as well as virtual. So what we are presenting is the summary of it, and also we have already prepared the draft report of it. And the dialogue, the questions or the dialogue, leadership dialogue will be presented by Dr. Charmaine, then myself and Dr. Sugatapala. And also at the end of the presentation, the last presentation, Dr. Sugatapala will present what the stakeholders want the Stockholm 52, as a follow-up activities, but what they expect from it at the end of it. So with that, let me now invite our first presenter, Dr. Manoj, to make his presentation.
Mr. Senanaika, very good afternoon to all of you. Please bear with me a couple of seconds until I share the slides. In this short presentation, I will briefly elaborate you on the consultation and the reporting process, and also the major themes and the recommendations that will emerge from the consultations from the stakeholders. Well, the consultation process could be divided into 2 segments, starting with the preparatory level, where so in that the consultant team, we had several sessions, and we developed and discussed and developed the consultation methodology. And then we got the support from the UNDP project management unit to identify the stakeholders and also to set the timeline. When we are identifying the stakeholders, we have to respect the whole of the society and all of the government inclusive approach. And UNDP got the support from their gender specialists as well, because that is also a very important element. So with all of our collective work, we developed the methodology, and then identify the stakeholders and the convenient timeline to do the consultation process. And then we present our plan to the Ministry of Environment to get their input, and also we got valuable insight and input from them to fine-tune our consultation process. Having all these preparatory works completed, we then moved into the consultation sessions, starting from the national level consultation. In every consultation session, UNDP project management unit, they introduce the Stockholm+50 concept and also the theme. Therefore, the participants or the stakeholders were well aware of what is their expectation and what is the activity they are really taking part in the consultation process. Thereafter, 3 of our consultants did 3 presentations. First one introduced them the reporting process, in which we explained them briefly how their inputs will be channeled through to Stockholm+50 conference representing the country. And also 2 other presentations present or explain them the evolution of the concept of the sustainable development, or the sustainability concept, and the background of the Stockholm+50, linking that to CGs, NDCs, and need. So after 3 presentations, they were well in line, or they were in the right platform to take part in the discussion. The next element was we explained them individual leadership dialogue questions, because we asked the same set of questions from all the stakeholders. Therefore, it was very important that all the stakeholders interpret the questions equally in the same way. Therefore, one of the consultants explained the intended meaning of every single questions in the 3 leadership dialogues. Of course, their response will be different, and it should be different based on their exposure and expertise and areas that they are working in. But everybody was expected to have the same understanding or same interpretation of the question. After this set of presentation to set the context, then we divided stakeholders into 3 groups to handle each of the 3 leadership dialogue questions. In each group, the stakeholders identified a leader to lead the discussion, and there was a consultant in each of these 3 groups to facilitate the discussion, like take notes and also explaining anything they need further explanation, etc. So this exercise took about 1 hour. I mean, that discussion in which they collectively answered uh, each of the leadership dialogue question through discussion and consensus among them. Therefore, everyone's views, opinions were brought into the table before those are finalized. After this discussion exercise, the group leader that I mentioned before presented their solutions to the entire house in the plenary session. For example, the leader of the Leadership Dialogue 1 group presented their questions and responses basically to the remaining 2 groups. The same thing continued for LD2 and LD3 groups as well. In that plenary session, if the other members had different opinions about the questions or about the views expressed in these leadership dialogue questions, or if they have some disagreement, or if they have some other opinions to fine tunes, all these were considered and then modified where necessary the responses. So finally, at the end of the plenary session, the answers for each of the 3 leadership dialogue questions could be considered as sort of a consensus among the entire house. And then we brought those responses for the reporting process. In the reporting process, we had quite a diverse responses from diverse stakeholder groups, but we were not in a position to put their responses in their own words in the report because we had the space constraint. For every question, we had only 1,500 characters, which including the space, to compile the response. Therefore, what we did was we group similar ideas, we connect and combine different opinions, and then we synthesize response on behalf of the entire consultation groups. That response justify the major views expressed in the consultation process. In exercise, it is inevitable if a particular opinion falls far away from the mainstream opinions, that may not find a space inside this 1,500 characters. But we did not just left those ideas aside. What we did was we put all the inputs as it is under annexes in the final report. In that way, we convey everyone's opinion into the Stockholm+50 conference. But not only that, that approach enhances the transparency of our reporting mechanism, because every stakeholder can go to report, can see the report and see where their response lies and where the mainstream responses lies. So they can see how their response is merged into the mainstream ideas. Or if it is not there, then they can see, okay, it is because their opinion is not the majority's opinion, or it is not in line with the majority's opinion. So the transparency of the reporting process could be assured that way. These are some of the images, the consultations that we had, the first few images. This is inaugural session, and also the consultation with the national same groups, local authorities, provincial council, civil society, etc. It was I mean, quite a wider cross sections we could cover in the consultation process. And these are the major themes we could capture as emerged from the consultations: green transformations, digital transformation, health ecosystems, capacity building, food security, inclusive partnerships, good governance, healthy living, and social inclusions. These were the 9 major themes we could capture from the responses from the stakeholders. And we could identify 8 key recommendations based on their inputs. One is the overarching long-term, consistent, cohesive national development policies, which has a focus on environmental and social safeguard. Second one is the sectoral policies, which are aligned with this overarching policy and also with SDGs, NEP, NDGs, and NDSA. And also rational resource allocation mobilization to ensure implementation of plans, programs by respect to mandated organizations. An inclusive participatory approach for policy making is another recommendation they mention, which include the participation of youth, women, local communities, private sector, etc. And also one of the recommendation was to establish an apex body for policy review, that is to review the existing policies and also to formulate new policies, and especially to monitor the implementation and giving feedback. And reviewing, redefining implementation agency mandates also another key recommendation we could identify from their responses. And also the importance of the responsibility and accountability of heads of institution is another area. Therefore, they propose introduce a system to ensure the responsibility and the accountability of heads of institution. The last recommendation is the policy formulation and planning and high priority for these areas: green transformation, green digital transformation, food security, health living and health ecosystems, capacity building, which includes education and training as well, social inclusion, and inclusive partnerships. These were the 8 recommendations that we could capture from the views of the stakeholders in our stakeholder consultation exercise. With this, I will conclude my presentation. We will be taking up questions and comments after all the presentations. Over to you. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Manoj. As Dr. Manoj said, we will take up questions at the end of all presentations so that you will have an overall picture of the whole consultations, and also all what we are presenting, what we did, we facilitate the process. All what you see, these are the response from different stakeholders groups. Our role was to facilitate their discussion, and what we are reporting is the outcome of it. So this is the outcome of the first leadership dialogue will be presented by Dr. Charmaine.
Thank you, Mr. Senanayaka. Good afternoon, everybody. I will take you through the outcomes from the Leadership Dialogue 1 in a very brief manner, given to the limited time we have. The Leadership Dialogue 1 was on reflecting on the urgent need for actions to achieve healthy planet and prosperity of all. So that is what the Leadership Dialogue 1 questions were around. We have used globally defined 5 questions. The question number 1 was to get their views on 2 to 3 good practices and pathways that would lead to the healthy planet status. Then the second question was relating to the first one. When those 2 to 3 good practices were provided, then we asked them the question, what actions would promote or scaling up those interventions in order to achieve the healthy planet, and what policies and structures, enabling conditions would be needed for making sure these actions are upscaled. Then we also asked the third question relating to when those actions are being taken, how best the marginalized and the vulnerable groups also could be benefited from those actions. Then as the fourth question, looking at the environmental and social safeguards in making sure those actions are implemented, looking at the environmental and social safeguards. Then finally, we were looking at, or we asked the question, when those progression takes place, what are the ways and means of tracking that progress by way of indicators and having matrices? So those are the 5 questions. As indicated before, we have had number of consultations. So what you are seeing here is the summary of findings that we collected over a period of 1 month or a little longer. So for the first question about the 3 good practices, there were many, and we have identified the practices which have been highlighted by many. The first was the promotion of renewable energy, and they came up with number of pathways, and which includes the revisiting of the feed-in tariff and or the tariff structure that we have right now, which is not in favor of renewable energy. Then providing incentives for people to take up renewable energy options, and looking at new such incentives, as well as continuing with some of the financial mechanisms which have been there already, plus popularization of renewable energy at domestic level. Then the second best practice, which came up as one of the priority practices, was restoration and sustainable management of ecosystems. As we know, ecosystem services are very important, and they are being degraded to a very great extent. So this was highlighted by many. So under which we know there are number of restoration initiatives, but it was indicated that having a national policy and strategy for ecosystem restoration is something that we need to work around. Then sustainable extraction methods, reduction and effective management of waste, promotion of home gardening, and establishment of national level mechanism for restoration and sustainable use mechanisms of especially the degraded habitats, including mangroves. Then the prevention of indiscriminate use of and misuse of agrochemicals were also pathways which are identified there. Then the third good practice was implementation of circular economy and sustainable consumption and production. In those lines, there were a number of aspects highlighted as pathways, and providing support to convert biodegradable waste, promotion of the use of construction materials with low embodied energy, food waste minimization, And it was also highlighted in many cases in education and awareness-based approach for attitudinal transformation. Then concepts like polluter pays principle and extended producer responsibility, a need for their application at a larger scale has been highlighted. Then on question number 2 on actions, which needs to be scale up. There were a large number of those, and as highlighted in the earlier presentation, some of those recommendations emerge from some of the points that you see here. Development of guidelines and regulations for policy implementation, because there were a number of good policies, but we have not seen some of the real implementation of those policies. Then identification and removal of barriers in areas where highlighted. Then identify and set targets for mandated agencies. There again, you have policies, strategies, action plans. Sometimes still things doesn't get done. So then again, there are a number of environmental laws. The enforcement aspects needs to be strengthened. Then promotion and incentivizing home gardening and sustainable practices. Likewise, there were many such aspects. So interestingly, the nature-based solutions also has been proposed, where the climate change related aspect, climate change adaptation with ecosystem solutions and disaster risk reductions for some of those. Then the private-public partnership also has been highlighted. In the question number 2, there were 2 sections. One was related to actions. The second one was relating to what policy and structural changes that needs to be there in order to see these actions are upscaled. Then the policy implementation through a legislative system was highlighted. Then the regular policy reviews and updates were indicated. Then the mobilization of stakeholders and building partnerships, strengthening and redefine roles of regulatory bodies where necessary. Then development and use of scientific basis for assigning subjects for ministries, establishment and empowerment of competent independent body for policy formulation, and incentive schemes for ecological agriculture and other nature-based solutions. Then on number 3, relating to how marginalized and vulnerable groups also could be benefited from such initiatives, providing targeted subsidies and social safety nets. So targeted subsidies is the key 2 words here, rather than giving it across the board. So providing subsidies and grants for economically vulnerable groups when the new actions are promoted. Then providing better alternative lands and alternative livelihoods for those who are currently occupying ecologically important areas. Then the waste minimization and various other aspects have also been indicated. Then second part under the question number 3 was partnerships to share benefits. So when you have vulnerable and marginalized groups, so there has to be some way of building partnerships so that they could capitalize on some of the resources that they have, but may not be able to engage in things like renewable energy by themselves. So things like renting of roof space for solar, as given in the 3rd bullet point. So such things emerge under this particular aspect. So partnerships came up very loudly under various aspects relating to this dialogue. Then they can be actively participate in policy formulation. So we are talking about the vulnerable groups. So if they get engaged in all the decision-making process about certain aspects where they are partners, then some of these issues can be addressed. Then they can be provided with sustainable livelihood opportunities and other rights in resolving resource use conflicts relating to the proposed activities. Then on safeguards the rights to the people and nature. So all these things are relating to the progress towards the healthy planet, where you select certain actions. So ensure social and environmental safeguards in development projects. So like in the previous case, this has more relevance there. And the important part is we have environmental and social safeguards like in environmental impact assessment process, but there are certain gaps. So ensure such in real implementation is the important point highlighted there. So that also can be done through participation and in case where, so the first thing is to avoid such impacts on nature and people where possible. If it is not possible, then you follow the ability to mitigate them, and you come up with aspects like relocation of people where necessary and create new partnerships to safeguard communities affected by development projects. So basically the partnerships and selecting options available for different groups of people. So furthermore, you have things like provide appropriate compensation packages and targeted benefits to affected people, like in the previous case, the grievance redress mechanisms relating to actions which are identified, then having baseline conditions, and about awareness of their rights where such is not found in certain cases. Then also provide for whistleblowers in various areas, and also to ensure their protection and promotion of triple R. Then finally, the process of getting towards a healthy planet, then there has to be a way of measuring the change or tracking the change. So the fifth question was relating to various indicators and matrices. So participants came up with these details. So I'm not going to read them out, and let me highlight few things under indicators here. Percentage contribution of renewable energy, renewables in the energy mix is something proposed, and we are also aware that there are a number of commitments made by government of Sri Lanka in achieving a higher percentage of renewable energy. Then per capita waste generation, recycling as percentage of recyclable waste generation, post-harvest food losses, percentage change in forest cover were some of those indicators identified. And there are a few more here: carbon and water footprint, change in conservation status of species, air quality index, and water quality related aspects, the percentage of organic waste converted to compost, then product recycling percentage of the country. So there were such details, and as Dr. Manoj highlighted, so we have selected them according to the procedures that he explained. And at the end of the other two presentations, we will have time to reflect on the aspects which I have presented and get your inputs as well. So with that, I will conclude my presentation and let Engineer Senanayaka take over. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Charmaine. Let me share my presentation. Okay. Okay, so now this is leadership dialogue number 2. This is mainly on inclusive and green recovery from COVID pandemic. Yeah, let me read out the question. Now you see LD number 2, achieving sustainable and inclusive recovery from COVID pandemic. Now here too we have 6 questions. Again, these are interconnected. So the first question is to understand the promising sustainable and inclusive recovery practices currently being applied. Yeah. And also the second part of it is to how we can scale them up. That is the first question. Then the second one is to, now the first one is the best practices, and the second one is the not so good practices, the bad practices. Either how can we get rid of them or how can we change them? The question. Then question number 3, now these practices, how can we ensure that all communities within a country and all countries could benefit? That is question number 3. Then question number 4 and 5 is on the industry. So after the COVID, of course, we have all experienced the situation, and we have learned a lot of things. And how can we create better performing industry? That is the first part of the question. The second part, also the supply chain. There had been a lot of breakdowns in the supply chain. How can we create better supply chains? And also, when you say industries, there are many different industries, manufacturing, services, and so on. So there, here we are supposed to identify the key sectors where this recovery or the transformation should take place. Then question number 5, these sectors, these critical sectors, what kind of commitment either they have or they could make, and also the responsible principles they need to adapt. In this case, industrial sectors and also the finance and the investment institution. Then the final question, now with all these things, we realize that there are opportunities for green jobs. What kind of green jobs created or can be created, and also for us to sustain some of these best practices, we need new skills. Sometimes the business need new skills, the government, the state sector need new skills, and then the academia and the education system should be ready to create these new skills. So these are the 6 questions we had under this leadership dialogue number 2. And if you take one by one, so the first one, the best practices. Yeah. So these are the most promising best practices the stakeholders suggested. Number 1, digital transformation. We know with the COVID pandemic, people have changed and started using a lot of the digital ICT, the platform like virtual platform, e-banking, e-governance, e-transaction, the e-commerce, cashless transaction, and so on and so forth. So most of them think that were the best practices what they have realized. Then the second point, with this, people have improved their the healthy living practices and also the sustainable lifestyle, maybe the food practices and good hygienic practices. That's the second point. And the third point, the changing working culture. Now things like flexi hours, work from home, hybrid, the modes and so on. Then finally, emergence of new business opportunities. With that, we have realized that, certain areas we have, our entrepreneurs have gone into very new areas, which we have not thought of before. So these are the best practices. Then how can we scale in them up? So development of ICT infrastructure. Now we realize that the digital transformation is taking place, but there are many barriers, so we need to remove that. So the first the suggestion was to improve the development of ICT infrastructure. Then also the policy and regulatory interventions are required. Then also some of these practices are at individual level, sometimes the community level. So there's a need to institutionalize some of these practices, because now there's a tendency to to forget some of these best practices. There had been some examples, especially in the state sector. Some facilities now no longer available after COVID. Then number 4. Also, number 4 and 5, I think, quite similar. Now, for this kind of best practices, what the stakeholders feel that there must be some national and international protocols to provide a legal background for identified best practices. So this is what they have suggested for scaling up. Then next, the question, the bad practices. Certain practices need to be changed. Yeah. We have realized that those are not good practices for recovery, green recovery. The number 1, with the COVID-19 pandemic, people tend to use private and individual transport mainly for health reasons. But now we need to switch back, revert back to public transport, of course, with the adherence to health protocol. Then also there's a reluctance to adhere health and safety protocols in public transport. Now people are moving to public transport. It is a good development, but then at the same time, people are now not giving due consideration for health and safety protocols. Then also stakeholders have realized that a lot of people have misuse or abuse prescriptive medicine, and also the negligence of personal hygiene, and also the haphazard disposal of waste, especially the PPEs. So these are the bad practices that need to be changed. And also there are some more bad practices. It's true that with the adoption of ICT technologies, we had a lot of benefits, but at the same time there had been a lot of ineffective and non-productive users of ICT, say addicted to sometimes the social media unnecessarily. Then number 5, and now with the COVID, people tend to move out from communal living, that is from flats to the isolated individual dwellings, and so if this should not be continued, of course we need to take precaution, but we need to pivot back for resource efficiency. Then number 6, also there had been some dependency syndrome, especially in the urban some urban segment. They were depending on the government support and other people's support. So that need to be avoided. Then also now this was highlighted. There had been a lot of initiative in the state sector for e-governance, but it seems that the regulators, there are problems with the attitude and also especially the knowledge of the use in these technologies. And also these cumbersome procurement procedures hinder the development in a situation like this, especially e-commerce and things like that. So those are the practices that need certain changes. Then question number 3, how can we ensure all communities and all countries are benefited? So these are the suggestions they have made. Develop dedicated programs for public awareness and public education. So this came up very loudly everywhere. So a lot of people are not aware of what is happening. Yeah. Then they create a platform for learning and sharing best practices, even within the country and also among other countries. Then reliable service-oriented supply system backed by the government. So we realized that there had been a lot of supply chain issues, supply chain breakdowns, so that very negatively affected the industry. So most of the stakeholders believe that there must be a supply chain, the proper supply chain system backed by the government with the service orientation. Then also academic research to survey and appraise good practices and across different countries and communities and should be disseminated widely. Now these practices, some of these best practices need to be researched and need to be recorded and need to be shared with everyone. Then also the supporting technology transfer. Finally, the language barriers. Now we realize, especially when we had consultation with CEOs, this came up very loudly. So the translation, the use of their local language. So there had been suggestion to use some of these latest technologies like auto translation and things like that. Then question number 4, how can we create better performing industries? So there are 3 parts in this question. First part is how can we create better performing industries, then the better performing supply chains, and what the critical sectors. So these are the suggestions came up. Again, digital transformation coming on top. Then the adapting, I'm not going to go explain these things since these are very well-known concept, adapting circular economy, use of renewable energy, and also in the agriculture sector, which they feel that is a very important sector, adoption of good agricultural practices. And finally, investing on people and effective management of human resources. So these are the suggestions for industry transformation, green transformation. And in the supply chain side, appropriate changes to labor laws to make them flexible and less stringent. And then responding to global demand conditions for industry growth and rationalizing import controls and restrictions. So this also came up very strongly. So some of these import controls and restrictions are badly affecting the industrial operation. And also now the need to integrate with the global supply chains. And the linkage between the large operators and the small ones. Then finally ensuring social safeguard through decent and safe work environment. Then the third part of this question, so it is continuing, sourcing from with the supply chain, sourcing from and trading with the regional countries. Then the adapting ICT-based supply chains, decentralizing supply chains, value addition for local resources, flexible supply chains, integrating with global supply chains by removing regulatory and trade barriers. So again, here it is highlighted because of certain regulation and the trade barriers, our industries are not allowed properly to integrate with global supply chains. Then these are the critical sectors they have suggested. Again, ICT sector is coming on top. Then the tourism sector, renewable energy, agro-processing and plantation industries, garment and apparel, pharmaceutical and healthcare, and finally construction. Of course, they all had their justification why they suggest these things. So that is given in our report. Then question number 5. Now these industries, what kind of commitment they should make? Yeah. So these are the commitments they have identified. In the tourism sector, it can be a leading ecotourism destination in the world. In the garment and apparel sector, carbon neutrality, because certain the big players are already going for the carbon neutrality. And then the agriculture and agro-processing, there are many things they have mentioned here, like self-sufficiency in food supply, adapting good agriculture practices, gradual transition to organic agriculture, then regaining the lost status, the world best tea, increasing the agriculture-based value addition, then development more equitable supply chain that ensures everyone's food needs are met. Last point also came up very heavily. The value chain and the equitable distribution of the gains. Then finally the healthcare, minimize the prevalence of non-communicable disease. So these are the commitments. Then responsible principles, adoption of circular economy concept, good agriculture practices, use of local resources and value chain development, develop infrastructure facilities, especially in rural areas, adoption of sustainable consumption and production, uplifting ICT literacy among rural communities. Now, the good part of it, a lot of the rural communities, senior citizens also used to embrace these technologies, but we need to create a better opportunity for them to learn and use some of these technologies. Then making convenient access to capital for business with affordable payment terms. So these are the responsible principles suggested. Then the final question, the 2 parts, what are the green jobs? What are the areas where we can have the creation of green jobs. Ecotourism, then the holistic waste management, adoption of green technologies, green products, pollution control related activities. Then the renewable energy, sorry, there's a mistake here. The fourth one is renewable energy. Then the ICT, garment industry, mobile vending, precision agriculture, and industrial automation, like moving to fourth industrial revolution. Then the skills, new skills required, again, ICT, IoT, and IIoT, sustainable production, ecotourism such as managerial expertise, operational, and also more importantly, interpretational skill. Then the pre and post harvesting, soft skills like managerial, project management skills, critical thinking, synthesizing, and so on. Finally, financial literacy and entrepreneurship skill. These are the new skills they have suggested. So with this, I conclude my presentation, and now I invite our colleague, Dr. Sugatapala, to make the final presentation.
Thank you, Mr. Sanayaka. So let me share the slides. So as discussed earlier, so there were three leadership dialogue. The third one is on accelerating the implementation of the environmental dimensions of sustainable development. So that's the theme. Like other cases, there are 6 questions here. I quickly highlight these and then shows the feedback. First one is looking at what are the biggest challenges we are facing to implement this commitment, the environmental dimensions in sustainable development. So achieving SDGs. So challenges, and also what are the enabling environment. That's the first question. Second questions, like earlier also we had this similar question, the good practices and pathways. Again, looking at this achieving 2030 agenda, what are the good practices we have, or we had, or we would like to have, and what are the pathways? Number 3, looking at the transformational changes required in 2 areas, governance as well as legal systems. So that the changes required. Number 4, what measures we can use to promote public, private, and development finance, or PPPs, especially looking at the reaching the existing commitments and priorities. So that's basically looking at the partnerships. Number 5, looking at what type of partnership we are expecting from UN agencies and beyond, other multilateral agencies from outside. Externally, what type of partnerships, what are the priority partnerships we are looking at? That number 5. The last question is looking at what type of capacities and what type of technologies are required to improve human well-being in harmony with nature. So capacities, competencies, it can be capacity of institution as well as individuals. And also we are looking at the technology, what type of technologies are required. So those are the 6 questions. So when you look at the first question, I'm highlighting both together, the challenges and enabling environment. So one of the major challenges highlight is the competence, the limited knowledge, skills, and attitudes, particularly at sub-national level, like local authorities, local government, provincial level, local authority level, that level, the capacity gaps, and especially on sustainable development, together with the language barriers. As Mr. Ganak also highlighted earlier, it strongly came out this concept, that this aspect, the language barrier, especially even the sustainable development. One of the key issue is the language barrier. So here, the enabling environment, they look at beyond the formal education, going for non-formal, informal education awareness, especially using local languages. Then going into formal education, integrating these concepts, SD concepts, into the formal curricula, including the early childhood development. Then capacity building, the training, education program at sub-national, that's basically provincial council and local authority level. Then number 2, the biggest challenge is the policy issue. This also highlighted earlier. The long-term overarching national policy and planning framework, the absence of that or lack of that is an issue. And then the pathway is basically development of such a overarching, long-lasting national policies. Third biggest challenge highlighted is basically looking at the stakeholder engagement. Again, this is highlighted earlier too, the lack of stakeholder engagement in policy formulation. So particularly at subnational level, here it's enabling environment is to use inclusive approach in policy making with a broader stakeholder engagement. Number 4, the biggest challenge, the placing more emphasis on economic aspect or environment or social aspect. Presently, appraisals are done by the financial or economic aspect without looking into social environment. So that's a gap or challenge. So here the environment basically looking at proposing use of sustainability criteria, including environment and social criteria and indicators for appraisal. And also based on that, we have to have a mechanism to allocate resources based on that. Then localization of SDGs targets to use in project levels. Like presently, we have kind of a localized target for the national level, but even for provincial or local authority level, even project level, that's not there. So there's a need to localize it so that implementing activities can be aligned with the SDGs. Third one is basically promoting integrated approach in development programs where social and environment aspect has to be bring it to even the program development stage, not just after establishing a project. So that's the key enabling environment interventions highlighted. So the second question is looking at the good practices in terms of this SDG, achieving SDGs, and then pathway to scale up. The good practices basically highlighted as the existing indigenous sustainable practices. In our culture, in our society, we had those practices. Some are now not there, but some are in small scale application or other, maybe some community they practice it, especially self-sufficiency of food at local levels, like traditional agriculture, then water security. There are unique indigenous practices that can be, scale up. So here the pathway is to, establish mechanism to share and promote these knowledge or best practices among local communities. So these informations are not there now, so broadly used. So the promotion is important. And then proper planning and execution of relevant programs at local levels. Some of those practices are there, but then not properly planned. So here existing these indigenous practices has to be put into a kind of a better planning framework with the execution so that you can scale up. Number 2, it's good practice highlighted as commendable 3R initiative in certain localities. The waste management team, like for example, some of the healthcare facilities, some hospitals, they are very encouraging or high standard 3R concepts are there. Some of the local authorities they practice well. Some of the industries. So therefore, if we capture those, then we can scale up. So therefore, by looking at those, we can introduce and enforce the regulatory or monitoring mechanism and appraisal system. Even a voluntary program we can implement to scale up 3R principles. Third one, basically available regulatory schemes for sustainable management. Like we have EPL schemes for industry, then EIA for new projects. Those are good systems. So therefore, that we can consider as a good practice. But one thing is, some cases this implementation issue. So therefore, we want to mainstream this regulatory aspect for proper implementation. So proper monitoring and regulatory schemes is a way to scale up. And recognition for achievements. We have to appreciate the ones who achieve this environmental management, sustainable management of aspects, and also we have to enforce penalties for violation. So those are the pathways to scale up these good practices. A few others like good practices, eco-labeling, energy labeling of appliances. Presently we have energy labeling program, eco-labeling program is being developed. So promoting green products. So those have to be scale up. So this labeling program would be a good practice to be scale up. So introduction of voluntary or mandatory schemes is the pathway. Then number 5, multi-stakeholder green initiative. There are quite small scale even these practices targeting environment programs like tree planting, then river and wildlife protection, green cities, green building initiatives, sustainability reporting schemes, incorporates. Those are good practices. Then we have community-based micro-industries based on ecosystem services, sustainable concepts. Those can be scale up through promotion. So there are 6 good practices highlighted under this question. Number 2, 3 question looking at the governance and the legal aspect. So what type of transformations we need? So in governance, there's quite a number. Restructure of institutional mandates and eliminate overlaps and better alignments. This also came up earlier. Strengthen the institutions, including e-governance, ensuring participatory and inclusive approach, including youth in decision making. Formulation of long-term national policy and strategy, this also came up earlier. Increasing transparency and accountability came up. Also, very specific item, strengthen the environment policy system. It's there, but then not, I think, properly implemented now. So the environment policy can be effectively used to improve the the environmental aspect of sustainable development. The proper utilization of human and other resources in the government sector with effective time management and scheduling. That's again came up for effectiveness, efficiency improvement. Set up an apex body for timely appraisal and corrective actions. So this also came up, having an apex body. This is also a similar one. Someone at the higher level, independent body to appraise the development. So that will improve the governance. Then the legal system, there are quite a number, review and revise existing laws and regulations, especially outdated ones. Is one of the intervention proposed. Development of new laws and regulations and their enforcement, including through bylaws of local authorities. It came up strongly that local authority, they have more, the convenient or the introducing of laws are easier in local authorities, and then easily we can introduce bylaws in local authorities to implement these regulations. So that's proposed. Then elimination of cumbersome legal procedures which hinder the participation of different parties as witnesses for violations. So because if we report a violation, then you have to go through a kind of a procedures to although you are not part of that team, but since you are reported, you are bound to get engaged with some cumbersome legal procedures. So therefore people will not basically report those. So therefore we have to address that according to them. Ensure the rule of law, that's a fundamental thing. Public awareness, especially on environment laws and regulation, and empower them because people have less knowledge on these environmental laws. Then what type of measures we can introduce to improve these situations? Establishment of legal framework to facilitate and promote public-private partnerships. That's this basically looking at the PP, the public-private and also development, financing. Personally, we don't have a good, system to promote that. So legal framework has to be established to facilitate PPPs or public partnerships like policies, regulation, guidelines. Development and promotion of innovative stakeholder engagement platforms to facilitate the identification of opportunities for partnerships. So kind of a platform for the different stakeholders to get engaged and then develop partnership. Number 3, engagement of private sector and civil society organization in subnational level decision making. Like we have this district coordination committee and district development council. There the participation of private sector or civil society is not seen, but here they are proposing them to get participated, allow them to participate so that you can get a better outcome. 4th one, the last one here is creating awareness and capacity building program on the importance and scope of partnership, because people and also roles and responsibilities. So to develop partnership, the stakeholders should understand their, the scope as well as the roles and responsibilities of each party. So that has to be, we have to create that awareness. So those are the measures. And further, application of PP models for sustainable agriculture is proposed. It's a special application there. Improve good governance in public sector so that other parties can get engaged in the government programs. Dissemination of information on availability of specific finance, especially the other resources, especially sometimes the development financing and so on, the private sector or other partners apart from government are not aware of that. So therefore, here they are highlighted that the other stakeholders should get the information on this, availability of these resources, the financing or other resources, so that they can use these resources effectively through partnerships to get the maximum benefit out of these, financings. Finally, take initiative from government front to create enabling environment for PPP. So they indicate that this type of partnership, best effectively can be initiated by the government intervention. So that's again highlighted there. Question number 5. What type of partnerships you expect from UN agencies or beyond that, like other agencies like maybe World Bank or ADB, any other the international agencies? What type of partnerships? These are the priority areas. First one is basically looking at the financial assistance through the partnership for national and sub-national level programs, but with a focus on sustainable economic transformation and access to climate and green financing. Number 2, technology transfer and capacity building is also highlighted there through the partnerships. These are priority. Then facilitation and creation of appropriate platform for sharing of expertise, knowledge and information with other countries, kind of regional or global level platform to share the experiences, best practices and so on. Number 4, and this basic target is self-employment, like the marginalized and vulnerable group like women or disabled groups, to support their self-employment through some programs, maybe technology transfer, maybe information, some capacity building, but highlighting self-employment of marginalized group. Number 5, by looking at the optimization or maximization of benefit to the local community or local society or economy through adoption of development projects to suit the local situation. So sometimes the projects comes and without really looking at the local context or situation. So therefore, here the proposal is basically to align the development projects to suit the local requirement, the priorities, local priorities and the communities, the local circumstances, so that the benefit will be maximized. So those are the type of partnership expected from UN, and there are a few other networking with regional and international parties through seminars, workshops, conventions, especially allowing the non-governmental stakeholders like private sector and other NGOs, others to CSOs to participate in this type of forum. Then partnership with the local universities with the international universities on sustainability research, education and training program. There are a lot of development in Europe, for example, where the universities take a leading role, and there's a possibility where our local universities can get engaged with that. So therefore, the development partners, UN agencies can facilitate that type of a partnership creation. Number 8, support to introduce policy and regulation to promote or facilitate PPP. That's basically to promote that regulatory or policy environment. And then also looking at the good governance, this highlighted earlier. This last question, basically looking at 2 aspects. What are the capacity requirements? What are the technologies required? The capacity basically at 2 levels. Institutional level, it was highlighted that effective information management. Sometimes we have data, but then we don't manage data. So therefore, data-driven decision making, we need information management system. So therefore, at institutional level, number 1. Number 2, have especially for environment aspect, the sub-national level, like local authority, like provincial or local district level, environment monitoring and testing facilities are required. Then number 3, looking at the human capacity requirement, there basically we are looking at the knowledge and skills. Then absorption capacity, basically to absorb technologies, adopt technologies, skills for developing ecosystem services, especially by utilizing and safeguarding natural resources. Capacity for localization of SDGs, targets and indicators. As I said earlier, we have not, localized the targets at, subnational or project level. So therefore, we need the capacity to do that. It's not direct forward. That type of training are required in human capacity building requirement. Technologies, basically, they highlighted advanced and appropriate technology for monitoring environmental parameters like air quality, soil. We have very few, good quality monitoring schemes. So that's number 1. Number 2, EST, environmentally sound technology, adapt to the country context. We have good technologies, but not really adapt to the local context. That's required. Then environment sound technology for waste management, like hazardous waste, e-waste, 3R. There are a lot of technologies in the region globally, but we need those technologies practiced in locally. Appropriate technologies to support micro, small enterprises, so industries, and also indigenous businesses. We need technologies, but then these are working in isolation and not much support in terms of technology transfer. So therefore, number 4 is looking at MSMEs, small, medium, and micro industries. Then, of course, especially looking at this e-mobility, like we have been as a country promoting it, but then there are a lot of challenges related to even technology, like charging infrastructure, electric vehicle technologies. Those are still, we have gaps, even battery and so on. So those technologies has to be transferred. Then precision agriculture also came up, the technologies for precision agriculture, and also sustainable material for infrastructure development. So those are the technologies highlighted by the participants or the stakeholders in their feedback. So those are the 6, questions covered. I will quickly go into the another set of questions, which was common for all the 3 groups. What we had to do, what they expect from after the follow-up of Stockholm+50. Basically, here we are looking at not only the support from the Stockholm+50, their organizers, but also locally what you expect, like looking at the NDCs, then biodiversity, the strategy and action plan, the SDGs. There are green recovery. There are a lot of local, policy and initiatives. So what do they expect? So in that context, they, highlighted several number of follow-up activities. These are aligned with the earlier comments, basically. First thing, the overarching policy, coherent, consistent policy is a requirement, so that they expect after this Stockholm+50, the national or international level, the importance of this one will be highlighted, and that change will happen. That's the expectation. Then align the sectoral policies towards that. Then also rational allocation of resources. Presently, it's not happening. Like basically by looking at these sustainability concepts or environment dimensions, the allocation of resources in different institutions should happen. So that's also a follow-up activity they are looking at. Then the participation of all the stakeholders, youth, women, local community, private sector in decision-making process. Finally, to have apex body, that's also highlighted earlier. Then mandates, revision of mandates of the institutions involved with especially environment-related policies and regulations. Then ensuring the responsibility and accountability of head of institution is also highlighted earlier. Then policy formulation and planning in higher priority areas. So this is the list Dr. Manoj is earlier highlighted. There are the key areas where all these stakeholders highlighted, and therefore we have to give a priority after the Stockholm+50 in these areas, so that there will be fruitful output of this, the dialogues. So that's all from my side. I think that will create a forum now for feedback for all the presentation. I will hand over to Engineer Gamini to moderate the discussion. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Kutapala. now it is time for us to clarify if you have anything, if you need more information on certain things. Sorry for taking up this question at the end of all presentation, but you can direct your questions to a particular segment of this presentation if you like.
Dr. Butika, you can also come in before opening. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you very much. Let's go to the comments and reflections and inputs. Any comments or reflections? And you can use either the chat box, so raise your hand and step in and make a comment. Yes, Surekha. Go ahead, Surekha.
Sorry, Buddhika, I think it's Susi Pereira.
Sorry, Dr. Pereira. Go ahead, madam.
Yeah, thank you very much. I think it was very good listening to all the presentations, a lot of information indeed. I had a slight concern when the policy brief was presented, because I mean, considering all the rich information, country-specific, things that were uncovered in this, but the policy brief is really very generically presented. So it has probably lost somewhat the flavor, the local flavor of it. So I was wondering whether, and if I asked the question earlier also, to whom is it intended? So it's a very technical document, and in the interest of the understanding of those who are going to see it, you may think of identifying it in a very brief way and adding most of those things into annexures so that only the gist of it is understood, because there was a lot that came out in the presentations that followed the policy brief. Ultimately what we want is something to implement. So that is my comment number one. The second one was at one point you mentioned about green jobs, and but it would be really good to see whether there is some analytical framework where, and also to put forward the concept that every job does have some green considerations, and so there would be a grading of the ones which are very green and the ones that are less green. But in every job, like just as much as we put forward a job description or whatever procedure, try to include even thinking about whether this is green or not, or how more green could we be. Like for example, now if you take a cabinet paper or something to for approval, they have these select committees, and they would ask what is the legal framework, what is the financial mechanism that you require, what is the monitoring and evaluation mechanism. But at that level, if they also ask us or any organization, have you considered the green mechanisms, whether you are adopting best practice, something like that. Maybe I'm not the expert, but maybe you can sort of put those kind of things also. That is from the implementation side, but my earlier comment was on the policy brief itself. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Sasipera. We will definitely look into that, providing further details with the annexures. You're right, there are lots of information received during the Colombo Development Dialogues on green development. So we will definitely take it into consideration when the policy brief is finalized. Thank you very much. On your second comment on the green jobs, and Mr. Senanayake, would you mind step in and provide some clarifications based on the consultations? Yes, thanks.
Yeah. Thank you, Dr. Buddhika. Now, I think Dr. Perra's comment, I think the first comment. Now, the two segment of our session today are looking at two different things. Though there are a lot of the commonalities. Now, the green development and the Stockholm+50. Yeah. So that I think that the demarcation should be clearly communicated. I think that is why now the second part we are going into detail. That is how we are supposed to the respond, whereas the other one is a policy, the document. Now, with respect to green jobs, our colleagues could add. Now here also what we are now under Stockholm+50, we are expected to identify the areas where the green jobs can be created. Now, based on this, the consultation, what the stakeholders want, now we are making few suggestions, or they are making few suggestions for the Stockholm+50 itself for follow-up. At the same time, there are a lot of things we can take it up internally, nationally. And then we can go into, as Dr. Perra suggested, maybe we can analyze, what are the sectors and what is more green and what is less green, have a ranking system that can be published, that kind of things could happen. But, as a subsequent, the follow-up activities internally. So this is how I see it. Maybe Dr. Sugatapala, Dr. Shamin, Dr. Manoj.
Yes, I also feel that I think there's a confusion here. What you have presented is two different things, like it's two different initiatives. We present in the same forum. So the first one is looking at this policy brief to develop a policy in the future. Like we are looking at that. So it's a policy brief to develop the green development agenda in the future. So in that development agenda, national development agenda, what are the areas we are going to cover and what the basis is the policy brief. Then the real, the evaluation, appraisals, everything will come later on. Like once this is approved, then we get a consent from the government stakeholders to go ahead. Then coming months, we'll spend time to develop the policy. Where again there will be a series of consultation to develop the real the agenda. So as then next one we talk about this Stockholm+50, something else. It's a stakeholder consultation to present to the Stockholm+50 as a national thing. So therefore what we have done there is basically get the stakeholder view, and they present as these are the the views of the nation. So I just want to highlight these are two different things, but of course, as Mr. Gami indicated, there's overlap definitely. The National Green Development Agenda platform, the stakeholder platform, will allow maybe future consultation even for Stockholm+50 follow-up activities. So there are those stakeholder consultation will be facilitated by the platform we are talking about. So therefore there's a community, and of course like green jobs and so on, that came up with Stockholm+50, but not in the policy brief. But then there is a commonality that we have to capture in the future. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Senanayake and Dr. Sugatapala, for clarifying that. Any other comments?
There's a comment in the chat box, Dr. Buddhika.
Sure, please proceed.
Yeah, in fact, now I think what she's asking to share the report. Now, tomorrow we will have a session with the Ministry of Environment where we present it to them, and with their feedback, suggestions, it will be finalized. And I think then we are supposed to put it in the public domain. So that will happen.
Mr. Senanaka, can we still give some more time for the task team members to deliberate and provide some additional feedbacks during tomorrow and day after?
Yes, certainly. So
yeah. What will happen is the delegation leave the country. Ms. Amratung is here, Janaki is here, probably will be able to get more information. So the formal statement, the country submission statement will be prepared over the next couple of days. But before that, if you can actually go through the draft document and provide your inputs, that can be incorporated and reflected in the document. Am I right, Mr. Senanayaka?
Yes.
Thank you very much. Any other comments? Right. Thanks, Tony, for sharing the link. Okay, Senanayaka, I think we don't have any further comments, but what we can do, I think the draft report has already been shared. Yeah. As Dr. Susi Pereira, very clearly mentioned, the Stockholm+50, it's about healthy planet and prosperity of all, very clearly aligned with the green development, discussions we have been having so far. So that's why we thought, it would be really necessary that we consult and, present the findings of the consultations we have been done, we have been doing with all the stakeholders, and share with the task team before we finalize it. There had been a number of consultations done even in local languages in the regions with a separate dedicated session with youth stakeholders. So lots of things have been done over the last, I think, couple of weeks. So please do, review it and provide your comments so we can make sure that your inputs are also incorporated into the document before we finalize and share, and that will be will be shared at the global discussions as well. Mr. Senanayaka, anything else from your side?
No, that's it, Dr. Buddhe. We understand. It was a very quick presentation. I think they need to have the report to go through it and make comments. We rush because of the short time. Yeah. So okay. I think the Sugandhi has already making arrangement to share the draft report so that they can make their comments. Yeah. Thank you.
Right. Thank you very much. Thanks a lot. So we can bring this to an end with that presentation. We have a couple of more areas we were originally plan to take into the discussion today, but in the interest of time, we are not going to have those discussions here, but we will soon share a quick pulse survey in order to get the feedback from the task team members to decide the way forward in order to identify the actions that should be carried out over the next couple of months. There are a number of things happening. I think most of you are part of those discussions. The National Climate Policy being updated, as Dr. Jayatunga very clearly mentioned, the 2050 carbon neutrality roadmap being prepared, and a number of discussions are happening. So we would like to see your active participation in those discussions as well. But first, we want to hear from you as a task team, how you want to engage in these discussions, and also to get your feedback on how we're going to go forward when it comes to the National Green Development Agenda. With that, I will invite Marlene to give the concluding remarks and also to bring the meeting to conclusion. Thank you very much. Over to you, Marlene.
Thank you, Bodhika. I don't think there is much more for me to add. I want to just say a big thanks from UNDP to all of you who have participated today, and as well to Minister of Environment for the collaboration and the co-hosting of today's event. And of course also to the expert team of ISL for completing the Stockholm+50 consultation and the draft report. And also to Sugata Palla for the drafting of the policy brief on the towards the National Green Development Agenda for Sri Lanka. And with that, thank you. And of course, a big thanks also to Dr. Jayatunga specifically for co-chairing the meeting and helping to push the green development activities and agenda in Sri Lanka forward. And I just also want to end by saying that I do think this agenda is even as ever important in Sri Lanka, not the least in the economic situation that we are in, where it's important that we embed a green development, a green growth, a green recovery, green economy lens into the decisions and the policies that will be taken in the coming months, but also, of course, in the medium term. So with that, thank you so much for joining today, and look forward to see you soon again.
Thank you.
Thank you.